The Nowhere is a peculiar place. A true living nightmare where, if you so choose, could live forever. It's unlike our world in more than a few different ways. Time seems to be abstract. The locations sometimes just blur together, and the adults, they all seem to be some type of monster in one way or another. So I wanted to take a deep dive into each of these maniacal child-eating monsters to see what it is that makes these twisted grown-ups tick. In this video, we'll specifically just be diving into the adults' characteristics and lore. Before we get caught, give this channel a little like and subscribe to the channel if you like indie games, news, and playthroughs. Thanks. So, in no particular order, our first adult lurks deep in the shadows of the mall. The Janitor. Also known as Roger, he serves as one of the central baddies of Little Nightmares. Roger has two very apparent roles within the cogwork of the underwater resort. One, he keeps up with all the machinery powering the mall, and two, captures any intruder/escapee who is loud enough to cross him and his extremely long arms. His design is one you can't easily forget. His dirty brown fedora, the snazzy soot-covered green jacket, his noodly elongated arms, which in my opinion is made even stranger by his disproportionate legs, and his weird small-toothed grin he constantly has. But something that has always intrigued me was his choice to cover his eyes. By the way, face coverings in this world is an ongoing trend, so be on the lookout for that. Maybe in the Nowhere, adults like to cover up things that they are ashamed of? His background is a bit ambiguous though. Some theories point to him being from the Pale City actually. Maybe his eyes were removed due to excessive viewing, but still loves the sound of TVs. One of my favorite adults in the whole series, the Doctor, is a twisted representation of perfection in the Pale City. And for such a big guy, he's really fast. Bizarrely, this oversized adult uses ceilings as a means of transportation. He crawls above anything we hide under and slowly reaches down to lift it up and look under it. You can even tell his skin has started to sag, being pulled by the weight of gravity due to him being up there for so long. Otherwise, his swollen gums, dirty button-up coat, and pale skin don't do him any favors either. He seems like he gets irritated very easily due to his obsession with perfection. The patients seem like they're his escape from boredom, continuously replacing their flesh parts with porcelain ones, no matter the outcome. And the weirdest part is that I think he wants to keep them alive at any cost. The Butler is an adult seen only in the nest in very Little Nightmares so far. He's a slender, floating man who has his arms locked behind him by a pair of golden cuffs. He's definitely an older man, with wrinkles, a balding scalp, and blotchy skin. He wears a standard butler tuxedo and dress shoes. Among other things, his duties around the nest seem to include ironing clothes, doing laundry, serving tea, and tending to the Pretender. But you find out very quickly you do not want to mess with this dude's chores. His own telekinesis is what keeps him afloat, and literally, any chance he gets, he'll come up with some really inventive way to kill you. The Hunter, the iconic first adult you face at the very beginning of Little Nightmares 2. Also known as the man with the shotgun, he wears some rugged classic hunter clothing, along with a burlap sack covering his whole head. This is another example of those adults covering their faces. I actually found some concept art of what he looks like underneath the burlap sack. He definitely has a good reason because he's looking through only one hole while hunting. Side note, he also kind of looks like Jason from Friday the 13th Part 2. There's not a ton of official background information on the Hunter, but there is an interesting moment that happens while running through the Hunter's swamp. It seems like the Hunter has lived here maybe his entire life. At least for a long time, possibly since he was a kid, and even had a childhood love here. At least one powerful enough to express it through a carving on this tree that we knock over. Whatever his story is, he's very relentless, but not very smart. I personally love this boss because it shows that there's other adults that live outside of the mall in the Pale City who are just as, if not more horrible than the ones who live in communities. Now, I'm going to assume that you've played Little Nightmares 2 because there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this section. If not, skip ahead. The Thin Man. He has a tall, slender frame with an old-school 1950s black suit and a curious look on his gray face. He's definitely a very imposing entity. He never speaks, but you know when he enters the room. He sort of moves like he's gliding, but with a glitchy static effect that happens at the same time. Compared to the other adults, we know a bit more about the Thin Man for sure. We see him in the teaser at the end of Secrets of the Mall, but he ends up being the central antagonist for Little Nightmares 2. His whole presence is basically looming over the entire narrative, haunting the dreams and reality of Mono because he resides within the transmission. We see he has telekinetic powers, TV teleportation like Mono, and maybe even time manipulation. Whatever his powers are, he seems to be running the show, literally and figuratively. You see, the transmission has turned all the remaining citizens of the Pale City into mindless TV-craving zombies. After Mono is, let's say, left in the transmission tower, it seems the transmission corrupts him. We see him wait patiently, seething in whatever emotion he's left with until he starts growing older, becomes noticeably thinner, and eventually into the Thin Man himself. So is Mono a new Thin Man, or is he stuck in a consistent time loop? Let me know what you think. The Lady of the Mall cuts a striking figure in the nowhere. I immediately noticed her porcelain mask, her geisha attire, and her consistent looming authority she seems to have. She's cold and calculated, and that's the worst because she seems to be behind every corner. Let's go back to the mask because it's one of the scariest parts about her. A featureless mask similar to a Japanese no mask, and another adult covering their face. And if you play Secrets of the Mall, you definitely find out why she's covering her face. She rules over the mall and brings in the visitors to gorge themselves to no end. At least until she herself kills them. There's no absolute answer to why the lady runs the mall, but it does seem probable that she uses her life absorption powers to retain her beauty. The countless shoes that Six trudges through give a good nod to that theory. Six eventually aims or stumbles upon taking her powers, which is great. Kinda, for her, because Six can just absorb anyone's life force in close proximity. A grotesque duo who works tirelessly to feed the passengers of the mall. The chefs are certainly not the prettiest to look at, but it seems like they put their blood, sweat, and tears into these dishes. Literally. With a love of violence and a feeling for meat, the twins were born to be chefs. As they shuffle across the cold floor, chopping, mincing, preparing the feast, the twin chefs sense something that makes their skin itch. A dirty, unwelcome presence. Vermin will not be tolerated in the kitchen. They use anything from hammers to cleavers and will not hesitate to turn them on intruders. And really the only difference between the two of these guys is their faces. One having a wide mouth with a wall-eyed stare, and the other with a puckered mouth and crossed eyes. They seem to have no problem churning out meals for the guests because they're doing a lot of it, and the guests might actually be the meals as well. It is said that after they feast, they leave one way or another. Next, we have another one of my favorites, and maybe the scariest, the Granny. We're not completely sure that she's actually old, but as her name suggests, she certainly looks like it. With a wrinkled face, a saggy neck, and long bony limbs, she really gets around pretty well. She's got a sweet haircut going on too, and other than that, she wears what seems to be a very short muumuu to top it off. She's our first encounter in the DLC Secrets of the Mall, and she is also the only boss that is DLC specific too. She does not talk and keeps isolated down within the depths of the mall. Possibly a lifetime prisoner, left and locked away, and vicious. Her behavior is kind of feral, deranged, and seems driven by food and or capturing our protagonist, the runaway kid. She lives primarily in a large hall that is flooded with water and is mostly underwater until she decides to take a little swipe at our legs and bring us below the surface. And one of the most terrifying parts of this interaction is how she's absolutely impatient. She'll knock you off any of the floating objects you try to rest on by ramming them. Essentially, the background of the Granny is unknown, but judging by the description of the chapter The Depths, she was abandoned to decay and rage. The Craftsman is another adult in the nest. He's only been seen so far in very Little Nightmares, but he reminds me so much of Kamaji from Spirited Away. But maybe not so grandfatherly. The first time we encounter him, we see him washing skin and dragging cages around. It's like he pieces together humans into dolls for the Pretender, who is a childlike resident who seems to be running the nest and enjoys having realistic dolls as playthings. The Craftsman, for one reason or another, makes these by utilizing what he's got. Imprisoned children. Go figure. He's an old man who seems wheelchair-bound, but that does not slow him down at all. He has extremely long legs and arms with long black fingernails. He doesn't ever use those legs, but they are twisted backwards, which is just so lovely. The best way to deal with him is literally just to sneak around him and hope for the best. I'd say the most iconic and terrifying adult in the nowhere might be this one, the teacher. While she seems to be well versed in teaching many different kinds of subjects, she also seems to utilize the strict type of teaching method. One that makes sure she has you under her thumb the whole time. The Little Nightmares website description of her reads, "Misbehavior will not be tolerated in the teacher's classroom, and nothing escapes her cold, twisted gaze. In her domain, children should be seen and not heard, and if one should be heard, they will never be seen again." So that's nice. With a dead-faced stare and ruler, she prowls the school preparing for her many classes she teaches for the bullies, the not-so-innocent porcelain students of the creepy school. I find her especially wicked because her actual awareness that she scares the children never falters her want to do so. She never talks and wears modest teacher's clothing, but, eerily, has the ability to stretch every limb in an extreme way. She even famously chases us through vents by ramming her head in and biting animalistically until we get away. One of, if not the most important adult in the nowhere is one that's seldom talked about. The Ferryman. He's a giant in a trench coat who speaks through a dripping, sagging face. In the podcast The Sound of Nightmares, Noon describes him as having a presence that reminded her of when the tide went out, the scent of ocean filling a room. He is a shapeshifter, a mind reader, and can even utilize teleportation. Traumatized kids have these nightmares of being trapped in these horrific situations, but wake up from them to return to the normal world. The Ferryman's whole job is to hunt down these children and bring them permanently into the nowhere, to cross the threshold. While his mission sounds monstrous, his actions could be reasonable to some. Unlike most adults in the nowhere, rather than screaming, biting, and chasing after children when he spots them, he kindly offers his hand and holds them gently, and honestly maybe to offer the children a space in order to escape the pain of their actual lives. The world of Little Nightmares would not seem nearly as vast without the intricacies of the surroundings. Your journey through the nowhere introduces you to secondary adult characters that I think are worth talking about. As we make our way through Little Nightmares 2, we find a school. The teacher is our primary focus, but there was another adult that was cut. The principal was revealed to us through concept art on Bandai Namco's Instagram page, but has since been deleted. He seems to be another giant human who is lounging back in his office chair with 3 black snakes. Extensions flowing up and out of his body through his eyes and forehead. We have no other information on his backstory, but what do you think these are? Also found within the school, but as an Easter egg, is the lunch lady. In a pale blue dress and a white apron, we stumble upon her final resting ground. There was some concept art of a cafeteria level with, who's that? Looks like the lunch lady. My guess is they scrapped the lunch lady and her level because of such similarities the level would have had to the chefs in the previous game. In any case, I think it's cool we are still able to find the lunch lady if we just searched around a little bit. The Wax Bellman was a cut character from the first Little Nightmares, but more importantly, one that was featured in real life at the Little Nightmares booth at Gamescom 2016. The booth had a seemingly innocent mirror that faced out to the guests, but would randomly light up to reveal it had a two-way mirror and this melty man was staring at them. He didn't end up being a huge part of the game, but you can find one of his creepy hiding spots as an Easter egg in a bathroom you come across. You can also see him in the ladies' headquarters in this picture. Because of this, some think he's the Hanging Man. The Hanging Man is another minor character in Little Nightmares, but he's one of the first adults we see in the entire series. We find his long, lanky body in semi-formal attire hanging above a suspiciously small chair. We eventually use that chair to our advantage though. There's not much known about the Hanging Man for certain, but there are some theories that tie him to the Wax Bellman and the nest because of the framed portrait. Could this actually be the Wax Bellman? Some think also maybe the Pretender's father. The chair being so small could also allude to a homicide, and this could all be staged. And the Barber was an unused character for Little Nightmares 2, and honestly, I think I'm okay with that because he would have been haunting my actual nightmares for a long time if he was used. Also a humanoid type adult, this guy is wrinkly and pale, has a curly middle part hairstyle, and a giant pair of scissors. While he was cut from the actual game, he is definitely still in the world. We see pictures of him hanging up around the mall, the hunter's cabin, and even the school. Was this Barber famous or something? The Little Nightmares universe is crawling with more than just children. We've seen a ton of adults/monsters along the way, each maybe even more disturbing than the last. From the twin chefs of the mall to the haunting presence of the Thin Man, these characters are not just adversaries, but embodiments of the twisted world within the game. I personally love that through their designs, Little Nightmares was able to help us reflect deeper on the society and inner workings of the Nowhere. As we bid farewell to these haunting figures, let us carry the scenarios, visuals, and potential of each one of them, and hope they're not lurking in the shadows of our own nightmares. Thank you for joining me on this journey through all these adults. I hope you had as much fun as I did learning about all these weirdos. Again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you like the content. It really helps. I do video games, deep dives, and news, and I'll see you next time. Peace.